Yes. Was that it? Was
I
that
know.
you asking
It
it?
felt like
Did
it,
I
but I was.
respond?
Oh, no, I mean, I can ask it
You-
if you want, but I was giving, you know me. You're
No,
like,
you
how do I
go
put
ahead.
words
Go ahead.
together? And I'm like, here's words. Hello, and welcome to Frequency Broads. I am Tara.
And I am Victoria, and we are so happy you're here. If you're a returning listener, thank you. We love you and appreciate you. And if you're new, welcome. We are joined today by the lovely, beautiful Alyssa Rose. Alyssa, tell us a little bit about what you do, who you are, your offerings, your bright, beautiful spirit that you share with the world.
Yeah, I'm Alyssa Rose. I'm a grief counselor and death doula in Portland, Oregon. I come to this work through the body and through body work and energy work. And so the ways that I support clients tend to be very holistic and can include body work and energy work. But a lot of my offerings are oriented around these big transitions from life to death and these big, like, processing grief, basically.
Alyssa, I think anyone who meets you would just be shocked to know that you do grief work and are a death doula because you are so full of life. And I think you bring that beautiful balance of like the life to the death part.
Yeah, my mom says that all the time. My mom is like, "Why are you doing this work? You're so happy. Like, what's wrong? Like, are you?" I think she's internalizing it like she did something wrong mothering. But yeah, she's like, "Why are you doing such dark work?" But I actually really do think that because I'm doing the work, like, it really informs my relationship with life and with love and the idea of impermanence, which is something I learned in high school because I was going to this Buddhist monastery, is a huge part of my life and a part of this work. And it helps me and the people I work with live in really vibrant, purposeful ways when we know that everything we love we will lose, and that we're already saying goodbye. We're saying goodbye in our hello and in the whole dance of the relationship or of the moment. It's like that tension between both.
So is that impermanence what called you to grief work?
I didn't know it was impermanence that was calling me, but it became really obvious, like, that was so core to how I lived, that it became obvious that I would be interested in looking at how we transition, big transitions and small transitions. How do we change form so many times in our lives? It's like the way the water returns to the ocean. Water takes so many different forms as it returns to the ocean, and it's still water. But being able to do that more fluidly and with more ease and acceptance as people who have attachments and ideas of security based on ideas that are all moving and dynamic. So I think for me, coming into grief work actually happened through death work. I had started volunteering with hospice and with Medical Aid in Dying with End of Life Choices Oregon, which is an awesome organization here who supports people who choose to use the law and the Medical Aid in Dying law. So I started volunteering with both. And it actually happened after I was present with my grandmother and my ex-partner's grandmother, both in their times of transition. And I was in the hospital with both of them and both the families. And these women were really similar in age and socioeconomic status, and even with the illnesses they were working with. But the families and the way the families could support them based on their own acceptance or denial of what was happening directly impacted the quality of care and the quality of connection between these women and their loved ones. And in one case, it felt really, really lonely because no one could really just be with her where she was at and with what was happening. So everyone was in denial, and there was so much anxiety and stress around trying to get her to eat, trying to adjust the pillow to make her more comfortable. And it was really difficult to settle into presence together. And the other situation was really opposite, where the woman was like, when it's my time, it's my time. Her kids were like, it's our job to walk her through the end of her life and beyond. And everyone was able to come together, and her legacy, because of that, and the family's legacy and resilience that was built through her dying was so significant. So that really sparked my interest in like, what are we doing here? How come we're so bad at grieving as a culture or society? At least in mine. I didn't grow up with people grieving in any sort of healthy way or any way at all. What about you?
Not very much.
No, but I have always obsessed over death. And
Because you're a Scorpio, right?
oh, yeah. Tara's a Scorpio rising. Yeah, where's Scorpio in your chart?
I have no idea. I should look.
I think I asked you that the first time I met you.
Yeah, I should find out.
Alyssa's a Capricorn. A true agent of change, I must say, because you really do hold space for people as like their worlds completely crumble. And it's actually like such a great experience to go through once you're on the other side of it. But that total surrender to what you're saying, impermanence, I've never really summed it up into that word before. So I just really appreciate you kind of giving me a different perspective on everything changes all the time.
And what a beautiful thing to be in that space, because I've met you as well. And Victoria's right. You're so joyful and light and beautiful. So to have someone be able to hold a container during that really dark and vulnerable time, and then to be that light is true medicine.
Thank you. It's really special to get to walk into that stage of life for someone. It feels like a huge gift and privilege and honor. So I don't take it lightly, but I try to bring light as much as we can. But it's, I think I learned really early on, the very first time actually that I went to a planned death is when I realized how much kind of tumbles out of my mouth that's just default, that like is completely irrelevant in the case of someone dying, of like, how are you? It's good to see you. It's like any of those kinds of things, like, what's your day like? Any of these things are completely irrelevant. And so it really forced me into like quality of presence. No one knows what to say or do at all. Can we just be natural and human? Because that first time I was like so scared, and I didn't want to mess up, and I didn't want to take up any space, and it was so awkward, versus just like, none of us know what to do. This is super uncomfortable, and we're all here together. And like, how can we just be human here together in this? Which is a huge part of my work, actually. And I learned that in the hospice work, volunteering, which the whole idea was you are the medicine. You're not going in there to fix anything or do anything. That's okay. That's the beautiful part of the death doula role. The death doula role and the hospice volunteering role, because we are non-medical, we're not going in there to fix anything or give medications or do anything like that. It's really so much about the quality of presence and connection that we're offering. The doula role offers a lot more than that as well. But these spaces are spaces where the focus is about presence. And I love that the Dalai Lama, he talks about how people think that they're going to go to him and he's going to heal them. And he's like, I sit with them in their suffering. Like, that is what I'm doing with them. And so to make more spaces for us to do that, I think is really, really essential to our healing. But it starts with our personal capacity to be with our own struggle and our own hopelessness and despair and grief and sorrow. Because if I'm uncomfortable and I walk in the room where hopelessness is up, but I'm really uncomfortable with my hopelessness, I'm likely to do any of the things that people do of like, well, at least the sun's out today, or you'll feel different in a few months, or whatever kind of distraction or cheerleading can happen because we're uncomfortable.
So I'm really curious, we're all human and we have our ups and downs, and some days it's just you feel a certain way. How do you kind of like switch from being a human with emotions and maybe being in a funk, or like, how do you shift into that state of being able to hold space and be that beacon of light for others?
Thank you. I learned that really early on too, of like I need to have ritual before and after I work with anyone. And so there's definitely like energetic clearing and that happens, but if I'm going in for more time, like more time and space around dying and grieving, I often will do a um, ritual meditation, prayer, song before and after I go,
Mm.
and clearing. I also leave a lot of space after I work with anyone to go be in nature as much as I can, even just to go on a walk. But I also do a lot of writing. That's a huge part of my practice, writing, being in nature. Dancing is a huge one. That's like a big way for me in my own practice, in my own care. There's a space I'm really curious about um, between this like therapeutic, I'm a neutral person that is just holding space for someone else in their process. And there's a space that's like, I am being impacted by what's happening emotionally and I'm involved emotionally. And there's a space in between there that I think is really interesting and worth exploring as in industry and as healers beyond me, because I find that I want to and have to go into these spaces where dying and grieving is happening and let myself be impacted, not in a way that I'm taking energy or pulling attention towards me, not in a way that anyone is going to have to take care of me, but to let myself be impacted by what's happening. I am crying with them too. I am like really wanting to bring my full self there, but not to draw.
That's similar to something that I'm working with right now as well, where, like you said, you create the container and then you step into their container, knowing that you are going to either cleanse yourself or you have some sort of protection. So you're not attaching to that, but you're just able to step into their bubble to help support, give clarity, give any other messages that you're able to read in that space. And then know that now I can step out of that bubble and just know that you felt supported and I can let go of the energy that I felt or helped you
Mm-hmm.
transmute.
Beautiful. And on that note, it makes me think of some of the grief rituals that I've hosted. When I am facilitating a grief ritual alone, I do tend to take a stance that is more emotionally guarded in some ways, because there are many other people and there's many things happening that I'm supporting. But when I'm co-creating those spaces, it's so beautiful to be able to go in and to create this amazing container, build really deep rapport and trust with each other, and to then also be in my own grief in the community,
Mm.
not separate from them or separate from that depth of feeling. So it's really, really been so rewarding to build the container and then feel so safe in it that I can be deep in my grief without feeling overwhelmed or unable to participate.
Wow. It's, I think, often perceived people with the financial means can have someone like this, but for kind of anyone, because we're all human, we all experience grief. And I think creating this like equitable experience for everyone or anyone who feels called to have support like this is really I just important to note because
Because absolutely, it's so, I feel so committed and passionate about creating a grief literate culture. I'm doing grief rituals and bringing people together around grief ritual. These are all donation based, Portland based grief rituals that happen, and we are doing the work together in the context of a grief ritual. But the idea is that we learn what we need in spaces where we're grieving so we can ask for it outside of a grief ritual space. Like I could come to you, Victoria, and be like, I am so deep in my grief around this specific loss. Can I just talk to you for an hour without you trying to fix it, saying anything? If you want to say anything, can you just ask me first? Can you just rub my head and listen or whatever? But like to be really, really direct with what we need, and then for you to also be doing your work that allows you to be in the presence of really deep pain and sorrow. So the more that we individually are doing that work, the more we're able to even create the safe spaces within our one-to-one relationships, our families, our communities, wherever they exist, to support that, and not necessarily need to come directly to a grief ritual, though I highly recommend it. And that's a really good place to practice these things and to understand grief in a bigger, like a wider way. But yeah, the goal is that we're all deepening our capacity, expanding our capacity to be with the range of human emotions, to be present to them in ourselves and within our relational worlds.
I'm curious about the details of this grief circle and what it's like for you if you are the only one, if you're the one holding the space for people and there are multiple folks. Do you kind of hold a circle or do you work with people individually? Do people get to connect with other people and like it's like strangers sharing their grief and like one's holding space, the other one's
Yeah,
sharing?
good questions. So the way I have learned about grief ritual and attended grief rituals all come through a woman named Sobanfu Somé and her husband Malidoma Somé. They brought grief ritual to the West from West Africa. So I consider definitely Sobanfu Somé a significant teacher. And then Francis Weller is a California-based psychotherapist, I believe, who does a lot of work with grief ritual, and his whole focus, and he talks specifically about the need for community to create containment and expression. Because if we have to hold our own, if we have to contain ourselves in the grief, we can only go to a certain depth of expression. And so by creating the space of the community to contain it, people can express much more deeply. So Victoria, to your question, these great grief rituals are always circles, and I've been just hosting these 2-hour grief rituals, but ideally it's more like a 5-hour or a weekend ritual, where we have a lot more time. But in a 2-hour container, we will sit together and share on a topic. Right now we're talking about the 5 gates of grief, which I'll come back to, but we'll share as a group. Then we break off into triads, and each person speaks for 10 minutes and has 2 witnesses just holding space and listening completely without responding. And so people get to go much deeper into their own story and everything that they're holding. And then we come back to the group and we'll do embodiment or music. Ideally, we have hours of drumming and singing and dancing and going up to a grief altar where grieving happens really in that space, and someone holds space for you. So when you feel grief moving through you, you go up to the altar and someone comes behind you to energetically be with you. And if you need anything, they're your support person. They can put a hand, you can ask them to put a hand on your back or to say something or to hold you in some way. And then when you're ready, you come back to the village, the group of people who are still singing and dancing, and you're welcomed back. And that's a huge piece of the ritual, for you to go be fully expressed in your grief, witnessed by your community, and welcomed back into the village. And then you become part of the village and you become a support person for someone else in their grief. And so it's really connective, and it's really establishing a deeper sense of belonging as we heal this disconnect in belonging, that kind of rupture in this disconnect from belonging or relationship, which causes grief, is healed so much by having these spaces of belonging and connection, like grief ritual, as we heal those wounds.
Oh, that sounds beautiful.
Wait, real quick, do you let people choose who their support partner is when they go to the altar, or how does that work? Because I'm like, well, what if I feel called to a specific person and I'm like, I want you to share your medicine and container with me?
Yeah, it's all self-selected. So if you, Victoria, were going up to the altar of the village, we're all watching to make sure you're not up there alone, and one of us would volunteer and just join you. So it is less kind of choosing and more like open.
Oh, I love that. Well, I think it's important to note that I also know Alyssa because she's an incredible massage therapist and just gives the yummiest massages. I used to be a massage therapist years and years and years ago, but I have to say I'm a massage snob. I'm very particular about who I get body work from, not only because of the energy, but then also because I need it a certain way, and I feel like Alyssa, you give it to me the way I like. So
Thank
was that too
you.
sexual to put on the internet?
No, thank you. That's awesome.
And I feel like I've known what you do. I mean, I've known of your grief work, but not to this detail. So I'm so curious, and I really want to come attend one of your circles and just be in that space. And I think it's also really important that people get to experience and practice holding space for others, practice intentional
Mhm.
listening. Because if someone's telling you their grief, you better be freaking present. Like, of all the conversations you're having with someone, and I think you have to practice it. It's a muscle you have to flex to kind of snap back into that present moment with another person. So, thank you for kind of teaching people a skill that we probably should have learned as children. It just wasn't part of the curriculum.
Mhm.
In Tara's class, it
Absolutely.
might be, though. It is actually. It is.
It
So,
is.
you had mentioned that you'll rub people's heads and you'll kind of maybe do some sort of energy work. And I'm really curious if there are any ways that you integrate your massage therapy skills with your grief counseling skills.
Yeah. Okay. So when I started as a massage therapist, I was full time with hospice. So I was going to the bedside, and that was so beautiful. I was volunteering with hospice, but also a massage therapist with hospice. And um, a lot of that work was energetic work too, because the closer that someone is to actively dying, the more hands off we're going to be, because they're laboring, they're working to leave the physical body. And so just anything we can do to support that process um, is was the approach there. When I was in massage school and read Body Keeps the Score, I was like everything he's talking about is about trauma and the way the body remembers and stores memory in the tissues. And I was also like, losing a loved one is one of the most stressful things that can happen in a life. And what does our grief care and bereavement care look like? It doesn't address the body at all. If we even have much of it available, a lot of it is talking and grief groups and these things, which are beautiful and amazing. But I was feeling there was a huge gap and missing spot of supporting people through the body. So my work with grieving often integrates body work and energy work, and that can really look different for people. Sometimes people want to talk and share when they're on the table. Sometimes we're doing energy work, and when we find certain spots, things come up and they want to share and explore and go deeper into what comes up specific to the location. Often there's a lot happening in the lungs and in the chest and in the throat when we're grieving in terms of expression and movement of that energy. It's really common in other cultures for there to be more movement, more dance, more movement, more expression than in my world around grief and what I've seen. So bringing the body into it and moving energetically and physically, lymph and everything for the actual physical benefits of massage, but also energetically, because so often that energetic piece can cause a lot of physical symptoms. But with grief and that brokenheartedness, it can be hard to sleep. So many people describe grieving in physical terms, like being punched in the stomach or not being able to breathe or like all of these kind of physical expressions around what grief feels like. So bringing the body back into the equation and into the healing.
Mm. So, can you walk us through what it's like to work with you when someone comes to use your services?
Yeah. I work with people in a few different ways, but there's two big ways. I really focus on working with people who are grieving and healers who want to support people who are grieving, or are getting more and more clients who are grieving and want to be able to better support and offer care there. So both of these tracks are a 12-week container where we're meeting weekly, and that can include bodywork, energy work, grief counseling, and then with the healers, it is more of an educational piece, but it's also a deep dive into their personal relationship with grief and their personal capacity to hold, and how do they work with boundaries and ethics, and how do they integrate this into their offerings and their business. So for the healers, there's a lot more of an educational piece. We're less likely to do body work and energy work, though there are tools and techniques that I'll share with them in how they can support clients. And then for the griever, again, that's a 12-week container, and that often includes a mix of the grief counseling, one-to-one talking, energy work or body work. And it just allows us to have that space, allows us the containment and the rapport to go deeper and deeper, and to watch how the grief changes and moves, and to be doing exercises that support expression. And yeah, so those are the two main ways. But I also work with people more one in a one-off way, massage and energy work, and around health and wellness as well, body work, energy work, and also grief counseling. The grief counseling piece is really interesting because we often think about grief as associated to the death of someone that we love, someone furry, someone or human, someone. But Frances Weller speaks to the 5 gates of grief, and that is a much wider look at grief. And so grief, according to Frances Weller, and these 5 gates, which he calls them gates because they're doorways in to ourselves. So the first gate is everything I love I will lose. So grief associated with that idea of impermanence. The second is parts of me that have not known love. So the parts that I've shamed or exiled, decided were bad, regret, remorse, all of those kinds of things, and the grief associated with those parts. The third gate is the sorrows of the world. So how do we look at and be with what's happening in the world and grieve that, while also living our lives and doing all the other things that we're doing. The fourth one is the things we expected and did not get. And the fifth is ancestral grief. So another way I support people who might not be grieving a physical loss, like a death, is around those other gates of grief. So much personal grief that hasn't been touched or processed. And when we live our lives walking around with unprocessed grief, it's kind of like unprocessed trauma or unhealed trauma. And so it can create a lot of havoc. And so kind of in all of those ways of grief, I work with people.
That is amazing. I have never heard of these gates of griefs. And Victoria and I talk about the life, death, rebirth cycle that we all go through. But just looking at it from those lenses of societal grief or what you didn't receive that you were expecting to, or things like that, is such just a deeper way of viewing this kind of emotion and the way it's stored in the body. And you mentioned that a lot of your healers that work with you come to you when either they're ready to start holding that kind of container, or they see that their clients are kind of in this stage and they want more information. But for those who are on the grieving side that are looking to come to you, is there a certain aligned time that they should call upon your service, or is it just whenever they feel called to?
Good question. Yeah, it's often they're already feeling uncomfortable, and often there's an experience of um, there's something off or imbalance, and I can't necessarily identify it. This is for the more ambiguous kind of grief, or the grief that's not associated with a physical death or traumatic experience. But there's something off, or things are not going how they want them to be going in their relationships or in their lives. Often that's when there's a lot more inner stuff that needs more care and looking at. But when it comes to physical death, I would really encourage people to come before the death happens, because there's anticipatory death, and for caregivers and people supporting someone transitioning, or even supporting someone through a huge life transition that isn't into death, but is a divorce or a move or the loss of a dream or a relationship, whatever it is, to start earlier when you are resourced and you're not in the throes of grieving. The death hasn't happened yet, but you're resourcing yourself. You're you're exploring the fears from a more resource place. Because if we can start working together in building out your resourcing, then then when the bigger griefs come through, you have a much bigger toolkit, and you know who your people are to call on, and you know what you need in those spaces.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I'm processing a lot right now. Just hearing you speak, I'm like, oh, I think I have more grief in me than I've let myself admit to. So,
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And I think I've probably mislabeled a lot of my grief, or just recognized like the shame and guilt in those, but not, which is related to grief, but not realizing that that's what I was really feeling, grieving that old version of me, or that old, dream, like you said. So I guess I've been mislabeling it as well. And I am definitely going to sit with myself later to really tap into that and see, like, where am I holding that? So thank you for bringing that to our
Yeah.
attention.
Thank you for speaking to the mislabeling. That's a huge, huge, huge piece. I'm really glad you spoke to that, because, yeah, grief is a natural response to loss. So wherever there's loss in any of those ways,
Mm-hmm.
there's often grief or space to really, really honor and look at what it is that you are either separated from, or that you no longer have, or the dream life that you have made choices that will now change that path. But to really see this loss again in that scale, in the breadth of what it can look like, and take time and make meaningful ways in your life to honor those losses and integrate them. My work, I talk about it as grief integration, because it's not something you get done doing. It's something that is woven into the rest of your life, and it creates gratitude. It's like, I'm so sad I missed that person or that thing, because of why? Because there were things we loved about them or that part of life. And how can I honor the loss, honor what I'm grieving moving forward? And when we can be really creative and playful with how we want to celebrate the things that we've lost, it helps us take our grips off of grief. Sometimes people are like, I don't want to stop grieving. I don't want to not feel this grief, because it's how I connect to that person or that thing. So creating other ways that are really intentional and to help support the also active process of grieving.
should we just like cry together right now? That'd be pretty and cute and like.
Well, I'm so glad that you again talked about the mislabeling, because I didn't think I had any grief. I did think I was just happy and I was good and I had no issues, and I wasn't really sure what everyone else's stuff was. I was just like, I'm pretty good, and I actually only was able to touch the depths of sorrow that I know and carry through, like, pleasure and joy and happiness. Like as
Mm.
I grew in those spaces, it touched on like the depths of pain and sorrow and sadness that I haven't looked at and had no tolerance for at the time, and could see how they were blocking each other, how
Mm.
I couldn't grow in my happiness or my depth of connection with people or any of those things until I grew my capacity to be with the hard stuff.
The way that I look at it too, and I love that you're giving that visualization, is that we're expanding in this circle. So if we want to experience more of the pleasant emotions, right, we also have to experience the unpleasant emotion at that same capacity. So if you're resisting that unpleasant emotion, then the barrier for the pleasant, like you were saying, is so limited because you're keeping yourself in such a smaller container.
Yes, and you're fixating on the negative and you're scared. Like that's a big bad scary thing. It's like death. In some
Mm-hmm.
way, it's a smaller, different version of our ultimate fear of death. But as soon as we start to deny parts of ourselves, we stop living wholly, or we
Mm-hmm.
are limiting our, yeah, the fullness of life that's available to us. If we're like, yeah.
That's what holy really means. Just saying.
It's like, this is really good except for that thing. Then,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it starts in that moment.
And I think, like you said, it's also just reframing that it's not negative, it's unpleasant, right? And not everything is going to be pleasant because we live in a world of duality and we have to experience both. So just reframing, instead of like positive and negative, good and bad emotions or experiences, it's just that's unpleasant and this is pleasant.
Absolutely. And there's a question with that, I think, too, the question of like, what is my grief asking of me? What is this
Mm.
challenge asking of me? What is this discomfort saying or showing me?
Mm-hmm.
So they're all messengers instead of just the
Mm-hmm.
happy, yeah, focusing on the happy, but like all of them as messengers with wisdom. If we can, yeah, to your point, move away from labeling it and moving away from it and be curious and spacious with it, the more we can hold, I think.
Yeah.
I'm like mesmerized in your, I mean, you just kind of took me to this place where I was like, kind of similar to you, where I'm not admitting that everything's okay on my end, but I'm like, fuck, I didn't realize there was this, I mean, needing calling attention to. And just by hearing you speak, Alyssa, and I think this is part of your medicine, is you've really learned how to put energy into words. And that's kind of not common. And it's been a challenge for me to do at times. And so I see the ways in which your medicine is, you're a guide. Like you, I felt like you kind of took me into my energy centers that needed that extra love and attention. And so I'm really, I just can feel the potency of your medicine. I feel so called to work with you now because I'm like,
Mm,
fuck this.
Yeah. So I know you mentioned that when you're working with someone in this grief container, that there are rituals before or after that you do to release that energy and come back to yourself. But what about your daily practice of self-care to make sure your cup is full enough to give to others?
yes, I do. I spend a lot of time in nature. That's a huge one for me in terms of grounding and connecting to earth, to myself, to spirit, and to be in benevolent solitude. Though I don't consider it alone in nature at all, but just full of insight and wisdom and lessons, especially with the breaking down of things and the new life that comes in the forest. So that's a
Mm.
big way for me. Lots of writing, lots of meditating and sitting, lots of writing. Um, those are kind of the big ones. I also do cold plunging. I consider the hot cold and definitely the cold plunging to be a part of my practice, which has really increased my tolerance for discomfort. of like, this is what cold feels like, instead of like, I hate this, or this is going to be so hard. It's just like, this is what cold feels like. That's been a huge part of increasing my capacity for discomfort. But yeah, those are some of the ways.
Thank you.
Kind of wanted to bring up something Tara brought to my attention the other day in this book that she's reading called Bringers of the Dawn by Barbara Marcinak. I think that's how we say her last name. If
I
not,
think so.
sorry. And we love you so much, Barbara. But you're talking about the like idea of these different bodies coexisting within our body and how each body needs a certain type of tending to. And I think that's what we're seeing in some of your work, Alyssa, is that you're tending to certain parts of our bodies. And I think, how would you describe it, Tara? It was like your energetic body,
Yeah, it was your physical body, your emotional body, mental body, spiritual body. And there might have been another one. I think it's similar to the koshas. They didn't frame it as that, but it sounds very similar. And the concept that your frequency, your full energy that you're giving out is a combination of all of those, like a formula adding together, and that's what's being put out. So when you talk about how most grief counseling is only to maybe a mental and emotional body, but forgetting that physical body, it sounds like you're practicing how to realign and reconfigure your frequency by tending to all those different layers of the subtle bodies.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for speaking to that. And I think a lot of there's a number of people who are like, my grief doesn't look like their grief, or isn't big enough, or isn't the right shape, or whatever it is, because we're kind of shown versions of grief that might fall into one of those. Like for me, I went to so many grief rituals before I could shed one tear. Like I couldn't shed a tear, I couldn't make a sound. I was just totally silent. And there has also been a lot of times where when I start to share and talk, it's like it flips a switch and my feeling goes offline. It's like I'm not feeling now, I'm talking, or things like that. So helping people to have many different ways into accessing and feeling what's actually there for them, but by starting in the presencing, because the body's always in the present, so coming into the present, into the body, and then allowing these different ways or support for the different bodies to do the healing. And for me, it's really important that we don't like extract or like push people or pull people too far. There's a lot of pressure to be more vulnerable and share more deeply, but like we are the number one caretakers of our heart. We have to make sure it's safe to do that. Otherwise, we're hurting ourselves by giving our heart to someone who hasn't earned our trust or might not be safe for us to do that. And then we have the potential of re-traumatizing ourselves or creating bigger barriers.
Oh my God.
So,
you're speaking to my heart so much right now. That is my pattern.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, it's been my pattern too. That's why I know
we
it.
love so hard.
Yeah.
Alyssa, do you have any retreats coming up?
Yes, I have been doing one retreat a year, and it's right before Thanksgiving so that we can come together to grieve everything that we're carrying and everything through this year before we open so much to gratitude and giving thanks. And so the grief ritual is the weekend of November 10th, and it's on the Oregon coast. It's so stunning and beautiful. It's the last house on the row, and it's all floor to ceiling windows, so you can see the ocean from everywhere. So we get a lot of time in the village that we create over that weekend. We have a lot of time to both be with our grief in nature, with the ocean, and in community, in creating a shared collective altar, sharing our stories, and going deep in that container together. So I'm really, really excited. It'll be up to 16 people, but maybe not that many. So it'll be a really intimate little group, November 10th.
Amazing. Alyssa, it's been such a delight to have you today. And it's such an honor to have you in this world sharing your beautiful medicine with us all. And if you'd like to find out more, where can people reach you?
My website is alyssarosehealingarts.com, and on Instagram I post everything, Alyssa Rose Healing. You can also email me, alyssarosehealingarts@gmail.
Well, thank you so much. We'll leave all of her links below in the description. It has been a wonderful time talking to you, Alyssa. I know I got chills for that retreat, so I might be one of the people going.
Amazing. Thanks for having me. It's so nice to talk to you. Go enjoy the weather.
Oh, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.